Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It is our 12:30 Eastern Time session 1B, called Green Players. And I look forward to this panel. I look forward to all the panels, but this one, because we're shifting to kind of a different definition of green, which is, again, why I love the theme. I think it's sort of really lovely. Um, again, my name is Ed Chang, and I will be taking over as moderator because we had to step away. So we're going to start with Chelsea Russell and Michael Nixon with their presentation on staying green.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Ed. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Nixon, and I'm presenting today with Chelsea Russell, and we're both professors at the University of Toronto. So our presentation is called Staying Green, Newbie Identity, Face Work, and Legitimate Peripheral Participation at the D&D Table. Our theme of this conference invites us to think about green in several ways. And as Ed mentioned, we decided to take up one of the meetings, literally green as inexperienced, uninitiated, or new. So at a D&D table, that person might be called a beginner, a first-time player, or a newbie. And depending on the group, this could be welcoming, embarrassing, protective, or patronizing. So our argument today is that green describes a social position, and it's produced through the ways that a group handles uncertainty, questions, mistakes, and uneven expertise. So this means that newness is shaped by more than the number of rules that the player knows, but it's shaped by whether the table treats them as capable, whether their questions are welcomed, and whether they're given meaningful authority over their own play. So I suspect that most people today would know this kind of scene. It's a player's turn, and the dungeon master describes the scenario that they're facing. Perhaps there's a door covered in strange markings. Maybe there is some kind of monster that's appeared, and everyone has now turned towards a new player and is waiting. And they look down at their character sheet and ask, well, what do I roll? And so this sounds like a straightforward rules question. They need to know which die to pick up, which skill, which of the many numbers or lines on their sheet they might need to look at, and what numbers to add up. There's a lot of this kind of mathematical, low-level work that they're trying to think through. But at the table, it also carries a social risk. The player has made their uncertainty public. They don't know what to do, and the game is really on pause until everyone else figures out how to respond. So someone might say, tell me what you want to do and we'll work out the role. Someone might just point at the correct number and maybe explain it. In other times, someone might take over and make the decision. Someone might even be more rude and say, we already went over this. So each response teaches the rule, probably, and it also teaches the player how the group is going to interpret uncertainty. So now the player is learning not just the rules, but whether questions are welcome and what it means if they're slowing the game down or taking some time. So this is the kind of moments that we are thinking through. So this presentation comes from a larger mixed method study of intergenerational tabletop role playing, looking at how people play with older or younger generations and how that affects one thing in particular, which is entering a game. So we started with a first phase with 227 survey responses, and of those, 178 reported recent intergenerational play. We also conducted 15 one-on-one interviews, and ideally, we're looking forward to observing some sessions to further validate what we've heard. So for this presentation, we're focusing on accounts of first sessions, learning moments, the dynamics that arise from that. Throughout these, the survey and the interviews, we asked how the players described entering a new game, how they learned expectations, and then to experienced players, how they remember bringing other people into it. And so we looked at the language and found it interesting how they talked about competence. People would apologize, hesitate, defer, correct, perhaps reassure. And so we're looking at some accounts of how people became recognizable as a newcomer and then how they became treated as legitimate. Now, Chelsea is going to look at the relationships in which this learning occurs and the differences between knowing the rules and being recognized as someone who belongs at the table.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So before getting into what green identity like is for us, I think it helps establish why people are bringing new players to the table. So um, we have some graphs later that show that like bonding and spending time together were the most commonly selected motivations. Um, and I'll talk about that more when we get there. But D&D as a type of game to play dominated the responses to the system question. So of the 151 people who answered it, 146 of them reported playing D&D. And so that makes D&D particularly useful as a case because it often is the sort of default entry point into tabletop role playing. So it has like extensive rules, it has a really large ecosystem, it has digital and physical resources, and it has a really strong kind of popular image that's shaped by actual play series and video games and fantasy media. So a lot of learning situations take place inside existing relationships. So somebody is like teaching a partner or a sibling or a parent or a friend. Um, and so an experienced person may already hold authority in that relationship, or the new player may have expertise in another area that doesn't like immediately translate into D&D. So I play with my parents a lot, or I make them play with me, I suppose. And so a parent might be new to the rules, but they still hold authority within the family. A younger person may know the digital character sheet better than everyone else, or like somebody with decades of fantasy reading might understand the genre while finding like the calculations difficult. So a sort of simple expert and novice division doesn't capture those layered relationships that we're trying to look at here. So um, Gary Allen Fine's shared fantasy describes tabletop role playing as a social world maintained across several frames. So the people gathered together, the game's formal structures, and the fictional world inhabited by the characters. So a newcomer has to learn how to navigate and move across all three of those spaces. So they learn which die to roll, but they also learn when they can interrupt or whether players speak in character, how seriously the group takes like the fiction, what happens when somebody disagrees with the dungeon master. Um, and then Sarah Lynn Bowman similarly emphasizes that sort of communal identity forming dimension of role play. So the game takes shape through interaction, shared interpretation, collective problem solving. And this is why rules knowledge and like social legitimacy don't always develop at the same pace. So a person can understand like very few mechanics and still be treated as like a valued storyteller. So someone else could attend for months and remain kind of like the new player. Their choices might be second guessed, their character might be managed by someone else. Their questions might continue to mark them as less capable. So greenness kind of depends on that relationship between what a player knows, what the table expects, how the group interprets that behavior. A confident player from one group can become green again when they join a table with different house rules, different humor, performance expectations, or ideas about what counts as good play. Next, please. Sorry. So this is one of the graphs that we have that describes the different motivations for actually playing it. So bringing it just into theory first, Lave and Wenger's concept of legitimate peripheral participation, I think, gives us this really useful way to understand that process that I was just talking about. So, in a community of practice, newcomers often learn through that supported participation. So, they begin at the periphery where their responsibilities might be smaller, and then assistance is readily available. And then through continued involvement, they gain access to language, practices, forms of authority. And the word legitimate is kind of important here because peripheral participation has to be recognized, I think, as meaningful participation. So watching, asking questions, making a simple decision, contributing to a small detail to the story, I think should count as being part of the activity. James Paul G also treats games as learning environments where knowledge develops through that situated action. So in D&D, a person can sort of learn what an ability check means while they're making one, and they can learn how combat works while taking a turn. They can learn what the table considers funny or disruptive or dramatic or uncomfortable by participating in the scenes with other people, and that process includes procedural literacy and narrative literacy and social literacy. So the newcomer then is learning how the game works and how this particular group works. And so when assistance preserves the player's ability to make choices, the sort of peripheral participation can become a path towards that greater authority. And when that assistance continually replaces that player's decisions, they can remain in that peripheral identity. And so Michael's now going to move from this sort of theoretical framework into the practices that people reported being used to teach new players. And like I said, this graph shows some of the things that they found motivational for the play.
So now looking at how players were taught, we can see a number of strategies that were used by our participants. And so progressive disclosure was the most common one, where rules we brought up as they seem to be needed. So 90 of the 101 who talked about this used this method. That was followed by visual aids, selected by 67. And then following that, we have trailing off a little more. We have things like session 0 or an expectation setting session, which was found to be fairly standard among players. And then we have other types such as quick reference sheets that provided summaries or other kinds of simplifications that were intended to promote the absolute necessities. And so this really focuses on the fictional intention, or the what is meant to be done in a scenario. So a player might say, I want to see whether the guard is lying, and then that's translated into the system. And that generally seemed to be the funnel, or the way in which most players came at it. So they said things like, the players need to learn as they play, because I think this is much better than trying to figure it out in the abstract from a book. I give people basic information, how turns work, but I don't really get into the mechanics in any detail until they're actually doing it. So we see that competence develops within play. Person is given access to the activity while they're still learning. And this does generally also communicate that a player's intentions are worth hearing before they have the technical vocabulary. So the emotional side of entry also becomes clear when we look at Irving Goffman's concept of face work. So we know that Goffman thinks of the face as the socially valued image that a person is trying to maintain during an interaction. This involves doing things to avoid embarrassment, repair awkwardness, present themselves as competent. So D&D has many of these kind of tests of competence. Everyone's watching while you're choosing an action. And we talked about, well, if someone forgets a rule, it could pause the session, require correction, and it seems to be affecting people's time, which can be an issue. And so new players were found to manage this through apologizing, about asking questions. They may remind people before they start talking that they're new. They can ask even what the best action would be, and really defer making a decision so that others would be seen to be managing that. Some people talked about preparing extensively to not be a burden, to try to understand all the rules. And so one participant described a newcomer who apologized. She apologized for everything. She was like, oh, I don't understand this. I hate to ask you again. And this game master had to eventually say, stop apologizing. You're equal to everybody here. And she found that addressed the question of status, so that the player felt valued, and that their expertise was not really as important as their worth that they're bringing to the game. Let them know that they can occupy the space around the table and participate before technical fluency. So experienced players and dungeon masters participate in producing this green identity through repeated ordinary game practices. So the first pattern that we identified is invitation. The group can tell newcomers their questions are expected. The dungeon master can translate it into mechanics, and experienced players can acknowledge that nobody remembers every rule. And this really helps to bring players on board and reduce the risk that's attached to their uncertainty. The next pattern is containment. A player might be told, don't worry, we'll handle the rules. So this can be helpful to reduce cognitive load and keep the game moving. But this could still lead to problems, as we discussed, if it becomes the permanent arrangement. So if someone else is always calculating the numbers or making all the recommendations, it ends up reducing their agency. So they do have some social presence, but not much in the way of authority over the play. And then the third pattern is gatekeeping. So this means that questions are treated as evidence. The player isn't prepared. Corrections are a matter of expertise, and the table's local preferences are presented as obvious features of D&D. Adrian Shaw's works on gamer identity is useful here because they show how belonging within game culture often depends on recognition, cultural capital, and proximity to established norms. So expertise can be a test of authenticity. In this light, the real player knows the rules, understands the references, and doesn't interrupt. But now the newcomer is really seen as not having any of that. So now Chelsea's going to finish by looking at the supports that can change this experience.
Okay, thank you. I see the 1 minute thing from Ed. So, okay. Green identity then is also shaped, I think, by the material conditions of play. And among the 79 respondents who answered the accessibility question, the most common supports were scheduled breaks, shorter sessions, reported by, as you can see on the chart, 47 people. 37 selected turn trackers or initiative cards. Other respondents talked about like seating or acoustic adjustments, remote participation. I know when I play with my parents, it's about the large printed sheets and also like the very obvious, like here are your spells, here are your dexterity modifiers and things like that. And so these supports can change the sort of social meaning of assistance because when everybody uses the same initiative card or recap sheet, I think support becomes part of the table structure. So when I print for my parents, everybody uses the same large print character sheets, for example. Can we go to the next slide, please?
All right. I think we're over time. I don't want to
Yeah,
push it, but so
I'm
just
trying to be
wrap. Yeah,
quick.
wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So
Wrap up.
there's no formal point, I guess, where a D&D player stops being new. The game doesn't like issue a certificate after 10 sessions or something like that. Um, so we'll just go, I think, to the last slide, in which, yeah. So reading green, I think, is a social position, changes those questions we ask about onboarding. We ask who's permitted to be uncertain without losing status. And we ask whether assistance expands a newcomer's possible actions. How is correction delivered? Does the group begin with a player's intention or proper mechanic? Right. And so a welcoming table doesn't need to eliminate greenness, I think, as quickly as possible. It just needs to make that uncertainty survivable. It needs to give newcomers meaningful choices and room to learn without asking them to constantly account for the time and attention that they need. And so I think the opportunity to participate has to come before expertise, and that's how a green player begins to belong. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Okay. Lots to talk about. Up next, we have looking at my sheet here, Jennifer Stubbs and Catherine Bowers about Green Means Go and Session Zeros.
Can you see the screen or is it all blocked?
It's good.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Green Means Go, applying zero sessions to research and academics. Our agenda today connects the informed consent form of the Ethics Review Board to consent tools present in modern games, though with the problem of breaking out of the game studies echo chamber and into that formal education or real world space. This is based on some meta-analysis or scoping reviews by Conway and Smith in 2026, as well as Lester, Skimolsky, and Fisher et al. In 2023. Specifically, how zero sessions could facilitate coaching for young adults to see themselves as agents who are empowered by a syllabus or informed consent form to question, doubt, and build trust, really building on what Doctors Nixon and Russell were just talking about, and taking it maybe off the table and into the classroom. Finally, we'd like to use the lens of greenhorns to games, how to maintain novice mindsets for empathy with researchers and students, and encountering emotionally effective struggles in the literature research. Agenda, and here's Catherine's first slide.
Hello. So our questions are really from the idea of using tools to revise, the idea of for example, an IRB research survey, an IRB approved human subject research survey into a zero session. Researchers don't want to scare participants away with lengthy legalistic barriers. So the questions are, what insights can studies of players offer? Educators also benefit from empowering students by using the first day of class as a zero session rather than a sprint through the technical syllabus. The application of safety tools from games may be the pedagogical trait of transference. Using a concept or skill learned in one context, now in a new context, is an important learning outcome. Even threshold concept, one difficult to rush or force, but all the more valuable as an entry point for the social emotional learning value of games to instructors, students, researchers, and participants. The aspect may be the missing link between activated learning, diversity initiatives, and cultivating a sense of belonging among students. So, and to build on that, this presentation really covers the research that we were working on. What started as a query about navigating uncertainty became a longer series of questions from our own vantage points. How can some of us learn to be gamers deep into adulthood? What lessons can we learn from how we work with undergraduate college students? And how can we apply them to our own processes of adventure? We chose the confluence of many green themes for this project because to us, the obvious tangles provided strands and vines to connect the interrelated questions. Although the research questions at hand initially focused on the Scylla and Charybdis of emotional safety and getting started with zero sessions, the process of inquiry quickly turned inward. We arrived at this conference with different levels of experience, and that guided our question formation, leading to autoethnographic reflection and mapping other locations in experiential landscapes where consent, reluctance, timidity, and the value of social bonds and other connections merge. So to bring us back to Jennifer's point, the question of, what are the elements in the syllabus on the first day, the secret syllabi of academia and elsewhere that confront students. The IRB and research ethics boards, threshold learning, high impact practices, and other spaces where students are learning new forms of engagement that often come with scripts, but also rely on interpretation. And that interpretation comes from what students carry with them into college. Students' home cultures may shape thinking about the role of consent in education and other learning spaces. Consent may be given reflexively if students see themselves as subordinate or in another scripted role. Uncertainties with language and navigating their positionality both present complex challenges without clear guideposts. During this research, we dug into the ways students and players, including professors, can navigate their own consent processes. So really, we have few answers. Our initial questions about how students and players can consent to play seem straightforward. What are the parallels? How can we embrace the ideas of newness and being green in the sense of new buds or new leaves? And indeed, each potential ending became a new threshold for us to investigate. And in this sense, each new plot twist took us into new ways of thinking how to use zero session and principles of consent. And so these were sort of wayward bunnies that became more than just rabbit holes. So, and finally, just to kind of set the level, the idea of threshold concepts are very big in information literacy and library science. Threshold concepts are metacognitive aspects of learning. Meyer and Land's characterizations of the efficacy of threshold concepts include invitations to see problems as interrelated conceptual shifts. They're irreversible and they're portals to understanding troublesome knowledge. There is no shortage of writing about threshold concepts in higher education. Here it is used to frame the idea of consent and participation.
These institutional review board, or perhaps ethic review boards, consent forms, are so cold and clinical. They're intentionally off-putting, like an old-fashioned game manual, and ditto for course syllabi. What if either were designed in a human register, chunked and approachable, like Swift Start guides for Wingspan? There are so many researchers with intersecting privileges who don't see the value in cultivating empathy for vulnerable populations, oversampled, oversurveilled people. For instructors, these are our lines and veils about grades, excused absences, stimming in class, formal email communication expectations, the hidden syllabus for our first generation students. The idea of consent is entangled in emotional safety and also a through line of educators' reluctance to engage in game-based learning or controversial topics. The same privileges feed some professors' confidence in their agency that they assume everyone else is just as empowered and ready to interrupt, when it's the very silence enculturated in me as a white woman to smooth life over for white men and older women in my life that mutes me. And silence is not consent. Both the syllabus, or the informed consent forms, are more than a metaphor. Each is a tool to start breaking through that privilege armor and start cultivating learning opportunities to experience when your no is ignored for a minute or belittled by someone else, that a no may be conditional and dynamic.
Many professors describe using IRB research forms as part of holistic inquiry processes for undergraduate students, especially those in experiential learning and class-based research. Seeking informed consent in these settings engenders empathy and, in many cases, prompts the students to reflect on the ways in which they may understand their own patterns of participation. The conditional or dynamic no and consideration of consent is part of a larger landscape. The idea of emotional safety has roots in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but as terminology, it is often left untouched and unexamined in the research. For this research, I thought it was important to unwind the term and understand its meanings. Recent publications in nursing research have parsed emotional safety as a term to mean feelings of connectedness, knowing that consent will be respected, and that a person in authority will understand a patient's vulnerability. In contrast, some research in linguistic anthropology queries the depth of this idea altogether, suggesting it may be, quote, fuzzy and vague. This is not a devaluation of the concept, but instead an invitation to be more purposeful about practices that create true emotional safety. Current frameworks for the practice of information literacy increasingly rely on the presence of emotional, affective, and other feeling illustrative language, such as in Mike Caulfield's SIFT rubric for information literacy. When confronted with information that feels shocking or stirs an emotional reaction, students may be invited by librarians to lean into the feelings that they have in order to work through the steps of understanding information as a whole, including historical documents and contemporary news or media. Current guidelines about information literacy in academic libraries and higher education are drawn from threshold concepts, which, in a vivid reading, can plunge a learner into a sea of uncertainty or other liminal space where they are confronted with new ways of knowing.
I was thinking a syllabus is like that dreaded informed consent form. I don't understand it. It's all legalese, meant to obfuscate real liability, and I'm screwed out of any protection. Just click yes and get past it. Just what I hope instead to engender in students and at the reference desk are these safety and consent tools, these habits and phrases or cues that transfer to daily life in a democracy during an election year. How to ask for a pause, how to be patient while another player collects their thoughts to request a change, how to respect that request without voyeuristic interrogations, and learning how to engage and push back against a syllabus or informed consent form for a study They're both adulting. They both encourage stretching yourself in another's mindset about what statements are offensive, belittling, or unnecessary. I chose to play for a librarian Twitch stream because I wanted to make the time to journal my non-diegetic thoughts for other librarians to perhaps see themselves in the game. To read a somewhat inviting and demystifying essay of what happens off screen in my head as a new player with limited experience. And I'm starting to realize, as with teaching workshops about data or programming skills, this gulf is widening into an intimidatingly insurmountable chasm between the in-group D&D or techies and greenhorns to games of a variety or any data skills. And this is where this autoethnographic method appeals to me, to say obvious things about struggling through a novice status, the discomfort of non-expertise, and the accumulated failures while learning something new.
So to embody new knowledge and participate in all of these processes as a novice again, um, in order to refresh the ideas of process and consent and understanding, I turned to autoethnography myself. First, I took inventory of my past experiences and triangulated them with sociocultural timelines and studies about educational games. Then, with Jennifer's guidance, I applied strategies from YouTube, notably the RTFM channel, and worked through the novice stages of analog games with the assistance of two colleagues here at my institution. Together, my colleagues and I played a session of Derek Kuhn's Primates, which was chosen for the subject matter, and then we debriefed. Our experiences with the game were mixed. Our collective experiences included being overwhelmed by the instructions, despite preparation ahead of time. Um, Engagement diminished by fear of doing something wrong, friction from language barriers, both natural and the vocabulary of scientific jargon. The session the session concluded with promises to sit for the game again. We sat with our discomfort and frustration, sulked for a bit about how the game did not go exactly the way we thought it would, and used the session as an eliciting device to uncover ways this mirrored the student experiences we have observed and with which students trusted us as librarians and classroom faculty.
In conclusion, we must, as librarians ourselves, play more, to have more facility to invite even newer greenhorns to try a game. The novice mindset establishes this liminal threshold experience when learning really happens. We as educators are responsible for being mindful of that space, that moment, that experience, and facilitating that customized event without bullying. Someone is always new to the conversation of andragogy, the Burkean parlor, just as with games. And there is no one perfect entry game. Given the myriad traumas possible in each individual's past, which might have pushed someone away from games or play, as librarians, we can bring generalist mindsets to destigmatize the technical jargon and disseminate the scientific or ludic idiom by saying obvious things about gameplay through autoethnography. We do not offer solutions. We do invite partnerships. 21st century libraries are nimble. Thank you. And our references, which I'll make sure to post into the shared bibliography channel.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much. Always love having librarians around. Um, uh, just a reminder that folks in Zoom can use the Q&A function to ask questions, or you can post them in Discord. Just put Q&A in the front and I'll hopefully catch them all. Up next, we have Luka Brave on From Role Player to Nature Lover.
All right. Hi there. Can y'all see and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So there's been a series of non-emergency but urgent mishaps in my life over the last couple of weeks, so I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for y'all.
No worries.
But if you will indulge me in going a little Stone Age and talking off of some note cards here. So yes, I'm Luka Brave, and I'll be presenting on From Role Player to Nature Lover, Harnessing Immersion to Encourage Time Outdoors. And you can find my bio in the Discord chat. So my research question for this presentation was, with the assumption that more time in natural spaces would be beneficial to the majority of tabletop role players, how do we use TTRPGs to actually encourage time outdoors? And the first point that I'll be making is, why do we want to be out in nature anyway? There's bugs out there, is a lot of what I hear. There's bugs out there. So there's so much research out there that shows that spending time in natural spaces, most studied of which are green spaces, forests, parks, and blue spaces, rivers, lakes, oceans, makes stress, frustration, aggression, and violence go down, and makes feelings of tranquility, concentration, physical, like biophysical health, and productivity go up, which I assume we're all on the same page, or is a pretty good balance there. Now, what was really interesting to me is that about a year ago, a new study was published on nature-filled immersive art. 2025, Eric Yoda et al., which was a group of graduate students in the UK, Japan, and the US American South, published an experimental study with over 500 participants, and exposed the study participants to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the video game, and two Studio Ghibli films, Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service. And they found that exposure to these nature-filled immersive artworks actually had similar results to being out in nature yourself and in the physical world, where participants reported feelings of calm, a sense of exploration, feeling of purpose, a feeling of meaning in their lives, and just overall felt more contented with their lives after experiencing this artwork. So I would like to take a moment to ask y'all to reflect a little bit yourselves, and you can put it in the Discord chat if wanted. What is your favorite nature-filled artwork? And I'll ask specifically, what medium is it? How does it make you feel? And what senses does it utilize when engaging with this artwork? So for this next section, I'm pulling a lot from the scholarship of Alinda Chang, especially 2019, Playing Nature, Ecology in Video Games, which great keynote speaker. And also Tristan J. Tarwater's recent presentation for the Game Devs of Color Expo, Decolonizing Cozy Games. And also general shout out to Game Studies Study Buddies for introducing me to so much cool scholarship. So looking at the overall patterns of nature in video games, it becomes clear that our relationship to nature as both players and our avatar in the video game ain't always great. Looking at the surprisingly extractive nature of Animal Crossing New Horizons, right? Where you get up these points that you can go to islands and essentially pillage them for their natural resources, cut down all the trees, take all the fruit, catch all the bugs, and then leave, never to see them or see the consequences again. Breath of the Wild, similarly, taking a lot of resources out of nature that you're not expected to give back in any way. And then there's, as Tristan Tarwater discusses, the colonial aspect of many like cozy games, especially farming games, Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon, where you as a outside individual come into this new place and use frequently monoculture crop farming to solve problems with your individualized agency and expertise and action. And then reflecting on a lot of video games in my gaming history, games that I really genuinely love, Firewatch, Abzu, Red Dead Redemption, a lot of my feelings, even when I have that sense of like awe and wonder, that like sublime of how gorgeous these games are. Firewatch, I'm like, oh God, is there something in the woods with me? Abzu, the whole time I'm like, I think that shark's going to try and get me. Red Dead Redemption, a lot of animals did get me, as well as people who maliciously were out in nature looking to harm others. And so what does this representation of nature in games, especially video games, actually lead to? What is it aiming for? And in the last, especially the last decade, there's been such a huge shift in the cultural attitude towards games. Games for Change, the Serious Play Conference, Game Devs of Color Expo, Game to Grow, Geek Therapeutics, Edu Games, the ALA, Games and Gaming Roundtable, Institute for the Future, Generation Analog, right? There's been such a shift of games are not only capable of being art, but they're capable of being meaningful and impactful and transformative. Which brings us to TTRPGs, which is my field and topic of growing expertise. And the thing with video games is that they got visuals and music going for them, and a lot of TTRPGs don't. And so when we look at trying to integrate nature into TTRPGs, we have to ask ourselves, okay, without the potential of visuals, without the potential of music, how do we incorporate this? How can we leverage the strengths of tabletop role-playing games specifically against the strengths of these visual and auditory mediums? And while we don't have those things in TTRPGs, we do have the player as a avatar, an agentic avatar. They have an identity, they have agency, they can make choices. Even more so than video games, obviously more so than movies. And I think that that is really the key to embracing this representation of nature and natural spaces in TTRPGs. Pulling a lot from the 2023 essay, Dual Consciousness, from Diacolmirano and Bowman. Great, go read it, it's great. So we have these concepts of bleed, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. Bleed in and bleed out is this sharing of, very simply, sharing of thoughts and feelings between the player and the character that they're inhabiting, right? And then we have a step farther than that, this concept of ego bleed, where the personality and general archetype of the character being played spills over into the player in the time after the session, after the inhabiting of this character. Over time, different kinds of bleed can affect the entire player's, it's known as their identity complex, right? And I want to talk specifically about this concept of immersion. So as simply as I can, immersion is a process where there is a at least surface belief that the player and their character are substantially different, that they're not the same person. Over time, while playing this character, you take, perspective taking and self-reflection on this character's actions and how they inhabit this world, how they interact with other people within this game world. The player starts to adopt the worldview of their character. And then after this, they have a bit of a identity merge and can move forward with their new identity, inhabiting some of that character's thoughts, responses, behaviors, and feelings. A little bit similar to the thesis, antithesis, synthesis of identity development and worldview. So the thing about TTRPGs, the thing about immersion is that players have so much potential for agency, which is great. That also means that they're much more likely to feel railroaded and feel preached to if the game itself or the GM has a clear correct answer or correct behavior or correct way of interacting with the story and environment in mind. So my suggestion is lean into player agency, lean into the benefits of TTRPG specifically as this open field of possibility. Give players real choices within the game, give them complex and difficult situations, and allow them to really figure out how they and their characters want to inhabit and navigate this space that doesn't have any simple answers, just much like real life. And specifically leaning into this concept of dramatic rehearsal. Shout out Susan Harmon. Please go read the work on dramatic rehearsal and TTRPGs. Again, fantastic, really big cornerstone of my thesis. And so for me, the most productive way of utilizing nature in TTRPGs is not to lean into the beauty of nature or even the sublime of nature, right? This awe and wonder, much harder to do in a non-visual medium. And I don't want to give players ownership over natural spaces, but I do want to foster a sense of connection to and responsibility for nature. Earlier, when I was talking about the benefits of being in natural spaces, those were very individualized benefits, and I do think that that's good, and I think that it has its place, and I don't think that that goes far enough in the way that TTRPGs can push us further. Have your players engage with the story as nature protectors, water protectors. Have them deal with ecological damage, the logging industry, resource extraction, environmental harm. Those individual benefits are good, but as Felix Roskowitsky states, in TTRPGs, players are exercising their capacity for imaginative, potentially revolutionary hoping. And I think that that's such a important concept. The Dulwich Center for Narrative Therapy, in their Charter of Storytelling Rights, quotes their collaborators, Rwandan counselors at Luka. "We never separate healing from justice. These go hand in hand. We see in our work how justice is a form of healing and how healing is a form of justice." In the rights of nature movement, Wanganui Iwi, a indigenous group of Aotearoa, New Zealand, states that the Wanganui River is alive. It is their ancestor and it deserves legal personhood and rights. And I don't think that time in nature is enough. I don't think that engaging in the concept of nature is enough. I think that TTRPGs can help us imagine different ways of being, learn different ways of organizing our societies, and actually get involved. I want TTRPGs to encourage people to become water protectors, to get involved with Plant Baby Plant, revolutionize our foodways. And so I just wonder that even if that player doesn't have personal belief, how transformative could it be if players spent time in animist worlds where nature was honored and protected and seen as alive as it is in our world as well. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay. We're moving right along. Excellent. Last in the session is Jason Cox, The Dead Man's Hat.
Hello, everybody. I do have some trigger warnings on mine. The more serious ones at the top here. touches on mental health, self-inflicted harm, suicide, and grief. They can be rough. And I've been on the receiving end of things that didn't have trigger warnings, so there you go. Things that maybe a little less rough. My own fluffy thinking. I'm still working out a couple ideas here. And also the fact that my LARP closet is mostly also my regular closet. I'm Dr. Jason Cox. I'm the head of art education for the University of Toledo, and my specialty in research is using games as arts-based research, either for, through, in art. And so I'm looking a lot at the role of objects, specifically in LARP here. Put on my very serious voice here. In December 2024, Cerberus stalked the streets of Brooklyn, hunting souls that had escaped his watch as Warden of Tartarus. So I played Cerberus for Concord Olympus, the first run. But we'll back up. Semiotics. If you don't know semiotics, it's the study of symbols. The idea is that a sender is using symbols that encode some kind of meaning that the intended receiver can decode. It does, however, have some issues. It can be garbled, it can be elitist. The idea of this direct thing one to another, it has cultural questions. Here's an example. Summer 2011, I went to Madame Tussauds. A lot of people were posing with Adolf Hitler and giving him hugs and smiling because they weren't really sure. They knew who he was, but to decode the proper response to what you do in Madame Tussauds was little lost on them. So I demonstrated my opinion, after which there was a line of people ready to replicate that behavior. Not that there's only one way to punch Hitler, but that was my way. This is the second to last time I would travel with my father-in-law, Wayne. The last time was when he helped us move from Maryland to Ohio, where I began work on my PhD. Social objects. I've talked about these in my work before. If you haven't met my work, I hope you look it up and enjoy it. But I'm an oddity, I suppose. Dewey talks about an interpenetration of self in the world of objects and events. And he talks about that with the suggestion that perceiving the connections is the first step towards making meaning. You make meaning, you reflect, you repeat. And one approach I've talked about, LARP documentation in particular, is the use of social objects as a focal point around which players can create, share, and connect to one another. This isn't normally something that was created by the LARP organizers. It's a lot of times personal things that costumes, objects that were created in the game, something like that. Because if you only do the organizer perspective, it doesn't tend to capture the view of the game as a whole. It's kind of like if you go to a museum exhibit about a war, you can talk about the events and it will be boring, but then you'll see the letter and it'll say something like, "Ma dearest Clara, it's been 3 weeks with no food," or something like that. However, social objects is only kind of part of what I'm talking about. This is Wayne. January 2013, my second semester of my PhD studies, he died by his own hand. Among the items we inherited after his passing was his black hat. It's the hat Cerberus wore when I played Concord Olympus. If you haven't heard of emancipatory bleed yet, it is real cool. Janaea Kemper wrote a piece on it some years ago. And she describes how a player's choice about what they create, what they give to each other, what they keep, it reflects a process of self-investigation, of exploring who you are. The documentation doesn't have to be shared with others because Blandy and Bolin, being art people, say what you determine to keep and reveal to others or not show them, as well as how you decide to display these objects, is a reflection of what you prize and hold dear. This is, again, not entirely what I'm discussing. This is me at Hawkins. I've played a father in multiple LARPs, or sometimes just a father figure. I guess I have dad face. And sometimes I have a hard time not thinking of the people who play my children in these games as my kids. And I didn't really realize until I put on this bowling shirt and went out into the game to be the father who'd abandoned his children and was asking them for a second chance, that I felt, it's my face, so it looks like my father. And with my hair slicked back, man, do I look old. But that's a Wayne shirt. Now, new materialism. If you haven't heard of this, I wouldn't be surprised. It's kind of newish. It's a theoretical framework in which all things are alive, interconnected, and in process. It's not focused on finding what caused a thing, like looking for a singular origin point. There's one of the philosophers whose name is Bennett, who says that's like trying to find the origin point for the Arab Spring. It doesn't really work that way. And instead, you look at a web of elements. Lewis, in art education, applied this approach to handbooks on puppetry. I actually come from puppetry. I was a touring puppeteer once upon a time, long ago in another life. And in their work, they noted the implied vitality of the puppet and the confusion between who has control of how events proceed. Puppet has friends, a puppet has personality. The puppeteer has to honor it. This is me as Chancellor Contreras for New World Magischola. Paws up, bears. So, as the Chancellor, Alfred Contreras made a difference for his students, led his colleagues against a common foe, and talked someone down from suicide. And after the LARP, I had the biggest LARP drop ever. I put on a t-shirt, got in car, wept. Because we do not always win. According to Murray, the term immersive, which Luka was just talking about, is derived from the physical similarity to being surrounded by a completely different reality, being underwater. Lewis, back in that puppetry article, again, notes how the discrepancy between what a puppet wants and its operator's intentions gestures to an anthropomorphic horizon of possibilities. A lot of times in new materialism, the point is to avoid anthropomorphizing objects. But Bennett, again, actually talks about how when you anthropomorphize the objects, the ideas, the characters, it's hard to pretend they don't have a certain amount of agency all their own. This is me playing with Evan Torner. Sometimes I played Contreras, who was Hassinger, Torner's character's mentor. In this case, I was playing a student who was a huge fan of Hassinger's band, K and the Cryptids. I made this shirt. I got him to sign my chest. And you know what? I'm legit a big fan of Evan Torner. Precious memories. I can't exactly say conclusions, hence the question mark. What does it mean for Cerberus to wear the hat? Does it need to mean anything? Afterwards, I'm not necessarily better or worse. I'm different. Maybe I, the characters, and the objects don't need to be productive. We just need to be. We exist in these spaces where we have these connections, and I don't play for therapy. I go to therapy for therapy. I play for exploration, but I can recognize that these things have an agency and existence outside of my own, whether it's Cerberus, Old Man of the Sea, or Paris the Lover. Here's my bibliography. And there's me. Thanks.
Amazing, amazing. Much, much love and fanfare. Okay, I'm gonna pin everybody, spotlight everybody so that we can do Q&A. So give me a moment as folks come back on screen and all that good stuff. Why is this not working? Or just people can come on screen. It works. Okay. If you have questions for our esteemed panelists, please let us know. Uh, so Jason is around. His camera is just not working. So in case you don't see him. Okay. I think there's a lot of threads that are going through this. I'm just going to do my best to look at my notes really quickly, but I think it's more important to get to folks' questions. But I think there is this, I think the question, the words that I kept hearing over and over again are things about agency and about certain forms of immersion or entanglement. I like entanglement better. And then thinking about ways that even objects, characters, people who are not people also have the ability to act, do, be, exist, influence our existences and experiences, which I think is sort of really interesting. That, you know, though the panel is centering certain kinds of quote unquote players, those players don't have to be humans, right? For example. And I think that is, and how you navigate new players as opposed to players that have different asymmetrical understandings of the world, and then maybe players that we don't understand at all because they're a hat or because they're a rock or, you know, a landscape. And I think there's that stuff that's sort of going on. So let me look at the Q&A thread. I think a question got asked in Zoom chat, so I'm just going to bring that back up really quickly. Let's see. Joe, who is this to? Chelsea, and yeah. I think the question was to Chelsea and Michael. Your results sound pretty idyllic. Did you have any reports of dysfunctional experience? And if so, what did these show? So back to the kind of like new players being welcomed in or not welcomed into a space.
Yeah, I'll start, I guess. So, one of the like we did have dysfunctional experiences, but a lot of the quotes that we had in the slides were actually from like the one-on-one interviews. And so, when you tend to do interviews, they don't tend to want to dwell on their negative experiences. And I'd say that our biggest find in the dysfunctional experiences was things that they didn't consider dysfunctional that we kind of had to place as that, or it was through the surveys. Um, One example, we talked about the different like approaches that one would take to newbies, one being sort of containment. And I think when people describe containment, sometimes it is like in a dysfunctional way. So I had one person who was playing and running a session with his dad, and his dad, like it's an ongoing one every week, his dad found a cape that turns him into a falcon. And every combat, he just flies up into the air and doesn't engage in combat now. And so he doesn't do anything about it. He just lets him do that. And I find that like a little dysfunctional, and that's containment. But he didn't phrase it as dysfunctional, right? He phrased it as like, it's just funny. It's my dad. And it is true. It's funny. And my parents do similar. hilarious things when they play, but in a way it is almost dysfunctional playing because he's not contributing and he is like, I think he's a barbarian or something, like he's necessary for the fight, but he's not there. And so dysfunction wasn't framed as dysfunction in a lot of cases. And then also Michael had, I think, some insights from his interviews too.
I'll just mention one case where a woman started a group for women at a library because she wanted to route around what she experienced at gaming stores. And so she had a great experience with women at a library. So if we're talking about, the background was perhaps more dysfunctional in that sense, what she anticipated. So she steered around it and had a great experience.
Awesome.
Yeah, so thank you for the question.
Sure. Megan in Q&A asks, this is again for you all. Did you notice actual play is having a role in familiarizing new players with rules and other expectations? So like Critical Role, recorded play. Speaking from personal experience, I felt that a lot of my friends became more confident after playing, but also watching others play for an extended time.
Yeah, thanks for this question. A student I advised, Mike Duddy, just did a survey and published the results before we did our study, looking at the Matt Mercer effect and interviewing DMs as far as how they found players and their expectations. And so he did find that there were different, he used the theory of idiocultures as far as those expectations. But I would say in our interviews, at least with this group, we didn't see big effects in terms of learning any rules in that sense. Some of the participants were brought into D&D fandom and became big fans of actual plays and could really recite the different, this season, like they were very in tune. So I would say we had parallel fandom experiences becoming non-green fans into those communities separate from the experience of becoming non-green players. But it was a big part of the media ecosystem that brought them to D&D, but we didn't really detect any learning rules or partially or anything like that through that. Chelsea, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I found the same that people tended to, sorry, not necessarily base on actual play at all. And if they did, their expectations were actually lower than you would expect. A lot of the older players would base their idea of TTRPGs on like the Big Bang Theory. And so really kind of diluted, like, I roll to kill the dragon. Or like, can I just do that again because I didn't roll properly? And so, yeah. And so I found that actually it was not really even that they had overtly high expectations. It was almost lower sometimes.
Awesome. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. This is for Jennifer and Catherine. So, as teachers or librarians, do you think there are any major differences between imagining green players versus green students in the classroom? In many cases, they're both tackling issues of identity and belonging and learning, but are there any differences that in those two groups coming to mind? So, between players and between students. And then, kind of a follow-up is, how do you encourage faculty to gamify their syllabi and utilize these safety or communication tools in their classroom?
I can speak to part of that. Jennifer is far more fluent in game studies and working with faculty on that front. For me, though, I am definitely what I did, since I did sort of the autoethnographic engagement, because I don't really have much of an experience with games, tabletop, video, like I'm a Scrabble person. So, but it was Simpsons Clue was a good one, but it's So for me, what I was doing, I was like actually trying to go through this process and confronting what I found kind of alien about games studies and the world of games. And so for me, what I did was like really became the novice student, where I was like, okay, well, how do I do this? How do I feel this? Like, how do I use this as a lens to encounter that? And that actually has as I go through my syllabi revision this summer, that are some of the things I'm going to be looking at, and it's just like more on my radar. So, and as far as like I said, when I was playing primates, what came out was like part of the reason I chose primates to play was because I was familiar with primatology, and one of my colleagues is familiar with primatology. So we were trying to think about like what is the, you know, what are some of the through lines where we could connect, and also like what does that matter. So hopefully Jennifer pops in and I was able to answer the other stuff. There she is. Okay. Hey, Jennifer, did you hear the first part of the question?
Yes, I
Oh,
just
okay,
have my
good.
camera off
Oh,
because everything is going wrong.
oh
So
no. Okay.
I
Well,
wanted
take it
to,
away.
I guess I would lean less on gamifying a syllabus and switching to games-based learning because creating games is very difficult and it relieves the pressure from faculty to have to become a game designer. And then now I have just learned about Meg Baker's communication tools. So if those are at all locatable, I wasn't able to locate recordings from 2019's Big Bad Con, but there's a blog to follow up on and this person to reach out to because calling them communication tools as a librarian is I won't be able to look up communication tools for you. And I was definitely using the term safety tools because of the Shaw and Monk Bryant Safety Tools Toolkit. So finding those keywords to do searches, but learning that there are definitely better terms that'll have less connotation with them, and yet at the same time also be really hard for metadata and subject headings for searching and co-collecting related information. So it'll be an evolving space and something we're here to help people connect to and learn about more. I see Dr. Cox says calibration tools, so many other phrases to start to explore, and how to get the faculty to do it. I don't have a magic. I do have luck that after 2 years of asking two people on campus to play Wingspan with me, one of them is a bird aficionado and bought his own game set but had never opened it. And the other, because they have dinner together all the time, finally said, oh, he's inviting us over for dinner. It took us 5 hours, and I had all of the player aids laid out, and my partner and I each coached them through. And I hope that they'll start to think about using games in the classroom, but it is a long-term slog. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, this is relevant, I think. Zoheb asks for Jason, but maybe for everybody, thinking about while we don't need to be productive, merely human, our academic jobs or even designer jobs, right, insist that we produce, right? Not just produce, but show mastery over any questions, specific theories, arrive at a firm conclusion, none of which really maps onto the mystery of life. I'll put you to the question I struggle with because your talk raised it for me. How do we remain human? And I'm putting that in quotes, not okay. Uncertain, curious, ambivalent, limited in academia or design or libraries.
I can provide my answers, but I'm sure everyone, we come in many flavors. I've struggled with that too and have given myself panic attacks about it. It is not great. But here's what I've been thinking about recently. I gave a presentation at the Playable Theater Symposium that Ed would have seen on something that I called Stone Soup. And that's one aspect of it because I have this thing I refer to a lot, this old D&D picture of a paladin in hell. And that's how a lot of us tend to feel like we're alone. We're fighting the good fight either because we believe in it or because of spite, but the cavalry's not coming. And the trick to the demons there is making us not realize that there's a whole bunch of other paladins that are fighting. The demons obscure the thought, they make noise, so we stop calling for help. So my main answer for that is together. Another thing that I would say is that the games that I'm working on right now, like I just presented one with Jennifer at Play Make Learn called Muses. I've been trying to make more games that encourage more of what I want to see in the world instead of critiquing it, which is not to say anything bad about critique games. It's just where I'm at. And then the other thing I had a thought about was value, because we a lot of times say what you do doesn't determine your value. And that runs into a thing where, according to the university, it absolutely does. I have to fill out a thing every year justifying my existence. But that's their concept of my value. And it's not the same as what, say, my daughter or my wife or my friends or. And one of the problems is we imagine that there's some kind of floating number over our head, this absolute number, if we could just know our own value.
Google
And
Scholar tells you that number.
yeah, and that's looking for it externally. Trust me, I have not escaped the trap of looking for the external value, but the fact of it is to understand that number is arbitrary, capricious, and based on relationships and not who we are. We have to value ourselves. And again, panic attacks. I haven't figured it out. I just know that that's where I'm at.
I just want to add that, I mean, one of the things that, I've struggled with since being a PhD graduate student and up until now is that, the interdisciplinarity is thrown around as this like thing that we want, but then none of our mechanisms actually really reward interdisciplinarity. And for the game study scholars out there that are thinking about, getting a job and promotion and all that sort of stuff, I'm going up for promotion, and one of my things that the chair said to me was, Ed, we can't find reviewers for you because you've worked with too many people, and that needs to be rewarded in some way, right? But that's changing the mechanisms, and so we're working on that. I think legitimately there's some of us that are really trying to work on those sorts of things. Luka, you had a question for some panelists, so you should just ask it in real time if you want. Uh-oh, now they froze. Oh, there you are. You're muted. Oh, there you go. Okay.
All good. Okay. I have a 5 laptop on library Wi-Fi. It's desperately trying to cross the Rainbow Bridge. Wait, sorry, which question were you referring?
Oh, you asked something in chat, and I just wanted to, if you wanted to just ask it, or is it just this is just a conversation for Jennifer, Catherine?
Oh yes, I had asked Catherine if you play Hank Green's Smush, the little browser game that's in a similar vein to Scrabble, but it's a like solo player game.
Okay. Wow, internet is killing everybody right now.
You know what? I haven't played it, but I have a different answer, which is I know Hank Green plays a lot of the games like Connections and Wordle and all that kind of thing, and he sometimes plays them on his videos. And in point of fact, I specifically play these games that are normally one-person games with my spouse. On a daily basis, we try to keep our streaks going. We play specifically in this order. We play Wordle. Uh, Golly, what's the second one? It's one where you're drawing lines to connect words around a theme. I forget what it's called. And then the last one, which is Connections. And these are phone games. They're not meant to be played that way, but the snuggling close to play is an important part of the day.
Awesome. Well, are there other questions? Folks can sort of go for it, Jennifer.
I did see Catherine joined if she wanted to respond to Luca's question about Smush. And then I have another one.
No, I was crackling a bit after the fact. So no, I have not played Smoosh. But thank you very much. I'm going to add it to my things I need to explore the summer before the semester starts list. So thanks for the recommendation. I appreciate it.
I have, I guess, a connection for Doctors Nixon and Russell that earlier this year, Dr. Bowman out at Uppsala hosted Dr. Cristo Leone, who's in a different session later. And the session he presented was about his technique that he's building to video TTRPGs, get that documented transcription, get that consent. And if somebody withdraws consent later, and to then tag diegetic, non diegetic tags within the transcripts, and to then keep it manageable for data if it's possible to then make open and reusable for replication. So, huge plug for his epic level of work, Dr. Cristo Leon. Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just really quick, our next iteration of this is to watch people live play, so that will be incredibly useful. Thank you.
Okay. We have a few minutes left. I invite the participants, panelists, to ask questions of each other, but I might, I'm just testing to see if Luka is present or not. But I might ask folks to, I think a lot of you are working in the sort of autoethnographic mode, or at least in the like, I know you're collecting data, some of you are collecting data from people who are using sort of autoethnographic stories and things like that. But I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that connection to, what is about that sort of mode that lends itself to talking about issues of greenness, newness, or even just play in general.
I have no problem jumping in. I what I enjoyed about it, and actually, one of the this actually ties into an earlier question about being human in academia. My colleague wrote an autoethnographic study about tenure denial in academia, and it's been fairly widely read. And so Jennifer and I discussed that, and it was actually one of those things that really inspires me. What inspires me about autoethnography is that it takes the banal and the imponderabilia of everyday life and uses it to kind of frame larger contexts. To some extent, the diegetic and the non-diegetic aspects of like what's actually happening in that moment. And since I'd had I don't have some of the the background that a lot of games researchers do. I was like, well, what's my problem, basically? And so I was just kind of like using that as a lens to go through it. And I did, the basic ethnographic tools. I used, like maps, and I did a timeline, and I like tried to triangulate like sort of like the socio-cultural timelines and everything, and like when did this happen, and blah blah blah. And also, I was able to bring in positionality and the other things that were working on it. And I think that's what makes ethnography and autoethnography is very dynamic, is that it's not just asking questions like, how did you feel about this? It's like bringing in all sorts of stuff and using multiple sets of data from, the emic and edic perspectives. And so you have like different ways of looking at it. And of course, also it's one particular way of measuring. So that's what I appreciated about it. And I think that it's one of the things that you can build on to, Chelsea and Michael said, is the idea of like the people didn't think it was problematic, but we were like, whoa, that's not, that's not acceptable or something. And so you have like multiple like ways, multiple perspectives, basically. So.
Most of my work is not. Oh, if you want to talk, Jennifer, you can talk first since Catherine just talked.
Thanks, Jason. Um, I was looking at the how to help other people if you haven't jumped into autoethnography. So Tony Adams, a professor on my campus, hosts a certificate through Bradley University where you can, it's about the cost of a graduate course, take the semester or even like a half semester condensed on how to prep, especially a dissertation proposal, so that you can learn enough of the system to then say, this would be a legit method for me to apply to the next 6 years of my life. And I really appreciate the way it looks at and critiques how anthropology or sociology used to be done a century ago of using the third person to talk about yourself. And now it just owns the fact that I'm going to use the first person and talk about myself. And now I feel so much less alone knowing that there are other people writing in this space and saying these things and then connecting it to the theory or the other literature. So you realize it is connected. It's not just navel gazing. And then just this past year, MIT Press published Mia Consalvo, Mr. La Jeunesse, and I forget the third name, but it's streaming for the rest of us. So it's about Twitch and how they had to experience getting on Twitch and who is or is not present on Twitch. And I'm hoping to introduce it to students because I don't understand Twitch, but it does help connect them to history and writing and self-evaluation. Back to you, Jason.
Hooray. This is all great to hear. I was going to say most of my work is not strictly speaking autoethnographic. I am sometimes talking about games that I've played, but I would view most of it more like art criticism or something that's meant to facilitate the development of education or new games. Uh, and in point of fact, the a lot of what I've done is to look for productive applications of role playing and live action role playing in those areas. So doing a presentation that is maybe I don't need to be productive is remarkably uncomfortable for me. Um, but and in that sense, like I wouldn't quite use the term growth as so much as the green here is looking for something that is new life to me, a way of engaging with the world, because a lot of the tools I've been using to engage with it have been causing me harm, to put it bluntly. And I don't want to keep going the way I've been going.
Awesome. In the last minute and a half, 2 minutes, I guess I'm going to bring it back to Luka now that you're moving again on my screen. Um, and I think this is connected. I just wanted, my question is like, could you just say a little bit more about eco bleed? Because you kind of just sort of mention it, and it would be nice to sort of just get a little bit more about what that means for you or for someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it might have, I struggle a bit with enunciation. Ego bleed, E-G-O.
Oh, ego bleed. Got it. See, now
Yes,
we have to
yes,
write
yes.
about eco bleed because that's
Yeah, I mean,
really cool to me. All right.
credit
Go
to
do it.
verbal typo, ego bleed. I mean, I think that'd be pretty cool as well.
No, and I think part of the question about ethnography and part of I think what everyone on the panel is working on is this kind of bleed from one domain to another, from one set of identities to another, from
Yeah,
one social group to another. And then now maybe thinking about how that then also connects to our environment or to the actual places, spaces, and objects that we are thinking about.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could kind of off the dome maybe come up with a kind of basic definition of it is
Go for
especially
it.
through role playing eco bleed as because I think in our modern world many people are very disconnected from nature or disconnected from noticing the nature that does exist around them. And so, off of my presentation of, embodying this role as a person who not only exists in nature, but can take action, productive action to interact and affect nature in these, broadly beneficial ways. EcoBleed may be a difference in mental framing of I as a human am separate to I as a human am part of this ecosystem and part of these natural spaces, and taking that into real world action and beliefs.
Yeah, I also think there's something about the medium shifts that you talk about